Hello everyone. At the start of this video, I would like to be very open and honest. This video was very difficult for me to make. Therefore, I believe this video might be very difficult for people to watch, especially if you are a trans or non-binary person who is easily triggered by transphobia and ignorance. It is perfectly acceptable for you to not be able to make it to the end of this video. So at the start, I would like to say a brief summary of what you need to know from this video. The anti-trans bills that are being pushed in 2020 and 2021, the ones specifically referring to trans women not being able to play in women's sports, and the ones that force teachers to out kids who confide in them, and the ones that ban gender-affirming care, all of those were created by a group called the Compassion Coalition. The Compassion Coalition was started by a woman in Alabama who believes, or says she believes, that she is trying to protect children. I think it is very important for people to be aware that the reason this is going nationwide is because this organization has formed and they are pushing it nationwide. So please be aware of that. Other than that, sign any petition you find, try and contact your representatives, do whatever you need to do. I still don't know exactly what we can do about it, and I will talk more about that towards the end of the video. But yeah, that's the main takeaway of this video, is that the Compassion Coalition is what is pushing these bills nationwide. In the rest of this video, I will be listening and commentating over an interview with the woman who started all of this and the woman who has pushed this nationwide. Again, it will be very troubling to listen to this, and if you cannot make it through the video, you do not have to. I am not going to be offended if you cannot make it to the end. If you have gotten this far, you know the most important information. Unlike my last video on the topic, I am a lot more emotional in this video. It is more of a commentary where I have done the research, but I am tired, and I am just talking and explaining things the way I would to another adult. In the last video, I kept it more educational and shorter. This video, I am really tired. So if cursing bothers you, if possibly offensive humor, in quotes, offends you, you may prefer to watch my original video on the topic. It will be linked at the top of the description. Thank you again for watching this far in this video. And if you do not continue in this video, I hope you have a wonderful day. For the rest of you that are sticking around, let's get into it, shall we?
Right now, in Alabama, healthy children as young as 8 who believe they've been born in the wrong body are allowed to take life-altering drugs that will forever damage their bodies. The Vulnerable Child Protection Act, also called VCAP, was drafted to protect these children. This is not a parental rights issue. This bill prevents child abuse. In Alabama, we have the Child Protective Services within DHR that prevents parents and guardians from abusing their children. In Alabama, parents are not allowed to let their children drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes or ride in a car without a seatbelt. But in this case, we're talking about knowingly sterilizing children, amputating healthy, functioning body parts, and forcing them to a lifetime of dependency of expensive prescription medications. Gender-affirming care has been leading children into these life-altering, irreversible medical experiments. All of this with the fact that every long-term, comprehensive scientific study shows that there is no mental health improvement with these high-risk medical interventions. It's also vital to understand that 80 to 99% of all children with gender dysphoria, if allowed to go through natural puberty and supported by compassionate therapeutic counseling, will come to accept their biological sex by the time they become young adults. 80 to 99%. This bill prevents 3 types of gender transition experiments on healthy minors. It prohibits giving puberty-blocking drugs and cross-sex hormones, and prohibits sex reassignment surgeries. All of these procedures can lead to permanent bodily harm, and this common-sense bill ensures that individuals wait until they're adults to make these life-altering decisions. Please contact your Alabama legislators today and ask them to support VCAP, HB 1, and SB 10.
Y'all, I'm so tired. I'm just tired. So hello, anyone out there. My name is Min, and for anyone that saw my last video about this issue, you will know I am not currently in character. I am covering this bill because it is designed to hurt people. I am a non-binary person, trans-masculine leaning, and I'm an art teacher in the state of Alabama. Now, On top of barring kids from affirming care, the scariest part of this bill is that it would require school staff, if a child came out to them, to turn around and out that child to their parents. And this bill is connected to the bills that are barring trans women from sports. All of these bills are connected. In my first few passes of the script, I had a really detailed story about my experience, but hopefully you don't need the context of my life to get into the right headspace. I might talk about it in another video, but I don't want this to be about me. I want it to be about this bill that's going to hurt children.
I am really pleased today to be here with Becky, and you're going to have to help me with your last name, Garrettson?
Garrettson, son
Okay.
of Garrett.
All right. She's actually the originator, starter of the Compassion Coalition. She started it in Alabama.
This entire first section of the video, they're talking about the Compassion Coalition and how they're trying to build it and create a safe place for people to come and learn about it. Keep in mind, this is the group writing all of the horrible transphobic bills that would cause, teachers to out their students or women to not be able to participate in women's sports. I'm going to skip over her motivation. If you want to see the full video, it is linked in the description as always, because I like to cite my sources.
Also.
That is great.
So can you tell me about the legislation that you were working on?
Yes, we really saw a trend happening across the country where children without parental consent were allowed to begin getting puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which we know would then lead up to surgery. And we felt, and the research shows, that this is long-term damage. Children will be, reliant on drugs for the rest of their lives. Even if they were to retransition, they're going to have a lot of health problems. And we wanted to be able to protect these children. We feel they are not mentally capable of making a big decision like this. Their brains are not developed enough, and all the research shows this, that they cannot see down the road like an adult can. And so we wanted to protect these children.
There is already so much to unpack. One of them being cross-sex hormones are not a thing. Estrogen and testosterone already exist in both men and women. If you've ever had a period or have any uterine condition, you probably already experience elevated levels of testosterone. They're not cross-sex. That's just not it. The day I wrote the script originally, I had spent all day going through highly conservative websites looking for articles about children being forced to transition without parental consent. And I only found one article about a mother in California not knowing her child was on puberty blockers. All of the highly conservative articles, they always read like the desperate mother is trying to save her child from the clutches of the alt-left. I was gathering articles to make a part 3, but I just don't think I can handle it. It's just too much to dig through. They really try and frame it as if puberty blockers were made for trans people. In my last video, you may remember they mentioned 7 or 8-year-olds being put on puberty blockers, trying to frame it as if kids are being forced to transition at the age of 7 and 8. It's a fear-mongering tactic. Puberty blockers are made for children who start puberty at an abnormally young age, like 7 or 8 or younger. Puberty isn't supposed to start until you're about 9 or 10. So trying to completely ban the use of these drugs is effectively hurting non-trans children. Also, not everyone who is trans wants surgery. In fact, doing the puberty blockers and hormones limits the ability of transitioning later in life. So it's not a linear line. One does not lead instantly into the other. I have no issue with stopping kids from getting surgeries before their bodies are developed. But I also think all of the rules about these surgeries should extend to legal genital mutilation. Like most popularly circumcision.
So this law would prevent doctors or any other medical facilities to give cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, or have any kind of surgery before the age of 18.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I have been very aware of the impact of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgeries. But one thing that I realized just yesterday is that most of these kids, if they go through a medical transition, they will be addicted to a drug one way or another. Because if they decide to detransition, their organs that usually produce their sex hormones are damaged. So either way, they're going to be dependent on hormones for the rest of their lives. And these are expensive.
Your body is not reliant on drugs forever. I don't know where this fear of highly addictive hormones comes from. I can't find a single source to back it up. The most I've found is an article about how hormones affect addiction to substances, but those articles are not limited to gender transition. Some were even talking about prostate cancer. So if someone else can find an actual article from a credible source talking about this, please send it to me because I like to be informed. Also, if you're listening to her phrasing, she phrases it as, "I realized just yesterday." She's not saying she found an article about it. She's not referring to anything other than her own thoughts. It's not any different than me saying, just yesterday I realized if God created us in his image, wouldn't that make him a hermaphrodite? I mean, one could argue that, well, Eve was made from Adam's ribs, but I could counter with, then how do you explain the mythos about Lilith being made from at the same time as Adam? And then if you're going to say Eve was made from Adam in that way, then women are not made in the image of God. I'm just saying, if you sit there and think about stuff too long, your brain goes to weird places. So maybe you should stick to whatever's backed by science as best you can.
They are. And even if they decide down the road 3 years after they've started their transition or even a year later that they want to detransition, they will live with those consequences. For example, many women who are doing these cross-sex hormones, within a month, their voice deepens. And when they go off those hormones, it doesn't change. It stays deep like that. And so they look like a woman, but as soon as they open their mouth, they sound like a man. And that can be very traumatizing them, and they will live with that for the rest of their lives.
In all of the conservative sources I've looked through, this is the only instance of lasting damage I can find. They say that the voice change is irreversible, and I have a few issues with this concept. One being, maybe it's time we stop gendering voices. I mean, outside of the trans communities, some dudes just have higher voices and some women just have deeper ones. That's just how it is. 2, out of everyone I've seen transition, it takes longer than a month for anything to change. But maybe I'm wrong, I've never seen a child in my area get hormone therapy and then suddenly walk in one day sounding like Corpse Husband. I've never seen a child validated at all in my area. Also, they talk about that voice changing traumatizes women. Where are your sources for that? What about women that have naturally deep voices? Do they traumatize themselves? If you have real evidence, you should show it. It would be so much easier to take your claims seriously if you cited them.
Can you talk about some of the other long-term impacts of these interventions?
That's a good question.
Listen, if you're gonna make that face when you're asked a question, you may not know what you're talking about.
Well, I think the dependency on the drugs is such a big one, but not being able to have children. Once they have the surgeries, those procedures they're not reversible, and they will live with those consequences forever.
This is where it already starts to get very repetitive. The drugs, as they are calling them, are not stimulants or depressants. They're not addictive. Infertility is not always the case with trans people. Puberty blockers just delay puberty. If you come off them or start hormone treatment, you still go through puberty. And as I've already said, not all trans people have surgeries, so trans men can still carry children. All the parts still work. Adoption is also open if someone was having fertility problems. In my experience, most LGBT people would rather adopt anyway. Personally, I never want to have bottom surgery, but because Alabama won't recognize me as a man until I did, I can see how people would feel pressured to feel like they have to have bottom surgery or be written off. I could see a good compromise could easily push off surgeries until even after 21, at the trade-off of letting people pick their gender on their driver's license.
And then, the hard thing is, I feel like a lot of people that are dealing as young people that are dealing with the question of transitioning. They're really questioning who they are. So they go through the transition and then they realize that they've made a mistake. But for the rest of their lives, they will, because of what they've done to their bodies, they will carry the stigma around forever. And people will always look at them and wonder what they have done, because the things they've done are visible and unchangeable. So it's just a hard thing these people are going to have to deal with for the rest of their lives.
This is a very misleading narrative because this currently doesn't happen, at least not where they're pushing these bills. In Alabama, trans people that are young adults, my age, are still treated like they don't know what they want. When they get even older, they are hit with this rhetoric of, oh, but if you were actually trans, you would have known as a child. And now they're trying to stop people from taking children seriously. You are writing this narrative that every child that questions being trans is actually just confused. Don't get me wrong, I agree that no one during puberty likes their bodies. It would not surprise me if there are kids that question their gender identity, go to explore it, and then decide they're fine with how they are. But it's more likely, if they are questioning their gender, that they would find themselves on the non-binary spectrum. Because we don't live in a world where it's one or the other. There are a multitude of gender expressions, and gender fluidity exists where one day someone could feel like a dude and the other day they could feel like a girl. The fact is that the stigma around it is because people like you lovely ladies are still so set on a binary, set on a checklist of anything that deviates from it, freaking you out. So what you're saying is, I don't want kids to go through this and decide they're fine with their bodies, and then they're going to be weird. They're going to be gender non-conforming. They're going to be weird and it's going to confuse you. You are the reason this stigma exists.
The puberty blockers have tremendous long-term side effects. People talk about them being reversible, but they're not. The side effects are not reversible, and the cross-sex hormones have horrible influence on the body. And the surgeries, like you said, you can't reverse surgeries once they're done. Once those body parts are gone, they're gone.
This gets really frustrating and really repetitive very quickly. The first repetitive thing, again, cross-sex hormones are not a thing. The second one being, not every trans person wants surgeries. So moving on to the puberty blockers, if you are trying to convince people that puberty blockers have long-term effects, just give us one example. Just give us one to make yourself sound credible. Here, I can pull one up. It can cause low bone density over time, but this can be combated with calcium and exercise. But you know, since you're arguing really hard that children don't have foresight, maybe they don't have the foresight to remember to take their calcium pills and stop their little baby bones from turning to jelly. I'm going to cut their next section because they continue to talk about the fear-mongering, oh, well, young children are using puberty blockers, as if puberty blockers weren't made for young children going through puberty too early. I did a bunch of research about it, but it feels out of my depth to cover it. You'll hear me say this a lot because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. They're just things that it feels inappropriate for me to try to explain out. I will link my research in the description, the WebMD information, but let's just skip it. There's no reason to cover it because I'm not a doctor, and they're not doctors.
I'm happy that we were able to help shed the light on it, and we saw very little pushback, especially from the conservatives. It's a harder issue, I think, with Democrats. Not always, but we seem to get more of a pushback. And I think just the whole LGBT side of the spectrum seems to be more on the Democrat side. So they take a little more work, but there are plenty that see this as a health issue and jumped on board with us.
So you find more LGBT people aligning themselves with Democrats because they tend to be the lesser of two evils. Historically, Republicans are actively trying to remove rights from LGBT people. So of course we're not going to be open to what you see as a health issue. Because if you were only focused on the health issue part of the bill, why even include a section that forces teachers to out children? I personally would be on board 100% with setting bars that stop children from having surgeries. I have no issue with that. But that's not happening in Alabama. You're pretending it is. Yes, I agree body modification should be for after you've turned 18. At youngest, maybe 16. Since, in Alabama, with parental consent, you can get married at 16. Yeah, that's still a thing. You're so worried about children, as if damage can't be caused, as if a stigma can't be around a 16-year-old getting pregnant and forced into marriage by their parents. But anyway, I take issue with people making up fake numbers, spreading fear-mongering about identity. Anyone that saw my last video would remember my biggest issue with this bill is forcing school staff, myself being included, forcing teachers to out children who have confided in them to their parents. And if they don't, they could face up to 10 years of jail time.
It's interesting to me, based on what I know about the Eagle Forum. I grew up as a liberal. I had a very liberal upbringing, and my impression of the Eagle Forum is that it's very much in support of parental rights. And so one of the things that I've heard about legislation like this is that you're taking away parents' rights. Can you address that?
How I think of this is that right now, this movement has taken the rights from parents. Parents are in charge of their children. It's their responsibility to keep them safe and healthy. And when they go around the parents and do these damaging things to children, that hurts the parents. That's against their rights. So this is definitely something we need to draw attention to, because parents are the ones who are going to love those children more than anyone else. So it is definitely something that we need to have these laws in place so that parents can stay in charge of their children.
Oh, but in your last video that I played at the beginning of this video, you said this wasn't a parents' rights issue. So y'all, here's the tea. Here's the sad fact. There is no guarantee a parent is going to love their kids. Sorry to break it to you. While parents are supposed to love their children unconditionally, they don't always. And instead of love, a lot of parents feel like they own their children. They feel like they own the rights to every thought in their kids' head, everything their kids are doing. This tends to be the case mostly, in my experience, with extremely conservative parents as well. From secondhand experience growing up with LGBT friends, kids who come out, if they get rejected, face physical and mental abuse. They get hit. They get dropped out on the middle of a street and told to never come home, or they get locked down by their parents trying to fix them. Keep that in mind as we listen to the next part of this video.
Because there are cases now where parents are losing rights to their children. They're being charged with abuse or neglect, or even having their children taken away because they're unwilling to accept it when their daughter or their son says that they're born in the wrong body.
Right. It really is amazing. And children are being taken from their homes, taken away and put into foster care. And all of this is really based on a bunch of lies that are being told to children.
Full stop. If parents are rejecting their children, cannot accept their children, mentally abuse their children, hit or injure their children for any reason, if a parent is neglecting their children, they do not deserve to have children. I don't understand how people delude themselves to think that abuse is fine because it's linked to these trans issues. I don't care what your views on trans people are. If you think I'm a crazy mentally ill person because of my gender identity, whatever. I've heard a lot of people in my area that have that opinion. I've had that opinion told to my face. Whatever. That's them. I would like to offer the point that child abuse is child abuse. And if a child is being abused for any reason, it's still abuse.
And they make parents feel terribly guilty. If they don't follow what their young children want to do, then they're a bad parent. And I'll tell you, for those out there, my 3-year-old grandson, he thinks he's Larry Boy on VeggieTales. And if I were to take everything that he says and just go with it, how absurd is that? So parents know best.
I think this is worse than the tanning bed thing from the last video. I make the joke a lot that if a child isn't 18 or older, they seem 12 or younger to me. That's something I do especially online to make sure I am never crossing any boundaries with a child. However, there is a huge difference between a 3-year-old child and a 10-year-old child. There is a difference between a 10-year-old child and a 14-year-old child. There is a difference between a 14-year-old child and a 16-year-old child. And there is a difference between a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. What is truly absurd is you are comparing a 3-year-old who thinks he's a fictional cucumber to a puberty-age child who is trying to understand why they feel weird in their body. How does that straw man not sound strange to you?
What about the parents who say, hey, I want my kid to transition. I know they were born in the wrong body. How do you respond to them?
My answer to that is, if that's how you feel, and I know many parents feel this way, support them, love them, get them into different kinds of therapy to help them understand why they feel that way. But then tell them they've got to put the brakes on until they're an adult. Help them understand that their brains truly aren't developed to think through this. And if they want to support them and as adults to make that decision, that's fine. But I think parents really need to see the dangers that these drugs cause.
But I thought you said parents know best. Could it be that these parents don't know best because they don't have the same opinion as you?
One of the things that I think a lot of parents don't realize is that the vast majority of children who have a trans identity will end up having that identity resolved if they're allowed to naturally progress through puberty. But if you put a child on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, that process gets stopped and they don't go through that process of puberty, which is it's actually healing to a lot of these kids. And I also think that a lot of parents don't realize that a trans identity can be a coping mechanism that is developed after a trauma or some other issue in childhood. Do you have any ideas about that?
Going off script, the next part of what they're talking about is they're talking about trans identity linked to trauma. From the interviewer's perspective, she has a video talking about where she was a trans kid and a therapist didn't confirm her because of sexual trauma she experienced. And so she's linked sexual trauma with trans identity. And I can't, in good faith, say anything for fear of invalidating her situation, but her experience is not all of our experiences. And to force that it is just wrong and troubling, and I'm not qualified to cover it.
And I think if parents thought about it in that respect, that this isn't about a kid being affirmed. This is about a kid being told they're born in the wrong body and the self-hatred that they have for their body is appropriate. I can't imagine that most parents would actually really want to reinforce that idea in their kid.
I'm sorry, this may be projecting a little bit, but from the way you are speaking, what it sounds like is, quote unquote, this isn't a matter of kids having complex emotions and feelings about their identity and bodies. It's about the left. The left are trying to make all our children trans.
Bringing out, since the first time I ever heard you months ago talking about this, is this really does confirm a hatred for oneself. And I think parents, it's important for them to see that this way. Their children were made, whether you want to think it or not, many of us think of it in the image of God. And it is the way, if you're not a God believer, it's the way nature made. You are the way you are and embrace it. But I think you're allowing that child to really enforce the hatred they have.
Quick step aside to say, get your fucking religion out of politics. People like you literally disgust me. You use religion to justify hate. You can cherry pick anything out of the Bible like pulling dingleberries out of an ass crack. In context, I was really lucky to grow up around philosophical, ethical, and theology-based Christians. I have seen such good in humanity done through mission work. People who just try and be a good person the way Jesus is in the New Testament. Those kind of Christians. Do you think Jesus would hang out with your self-serving Christianity bigotry? His best friends were prostitutes and thugs. Getting back on topic, What really disgusts me about all of this is they are pushing this narrative that giving these medications to kids is wrong. What are they going to do about children born intersex? Are they just going to let people not conform to the gender binary they've set? No one ever thinks about intersex people, but it's estimated that 1 or 2 out of 100 Americans are intersex. This information comes from Planned Parenthood. It will be linked below. You know what they do to intersex people? Well, intersex people with noticeable genital oddities. A lot of doctors will perform surgeries on the fucking babies right out of the womb and give them hormones so they match the gender that the parents have chosen for them. Is that going to be illegal now? Just so we're all on the same page, is that going to be illegal now? You're bitching about puberty age kids wanting to experiment with identity when there are actual fucking babies getting genital surgery and mutilation. You're gross. They talk a little bit about people in England as they get older detransitioning and using this as a means to say that kids should not explore gender identity at all. I'm really tired. This is over 20 minutes at this point, and the full video is linked down below, so I'm just gonna fucking skip it.
Do you have conversion therapy bans in Alabama?
Not that I know of at this point, but we do know that when we wrote our bill, we brought in several therapists and counselors to advise us on this bill. And they are very nervous and concerned that there will be therapy bans. We're seeing that all across the country. And you're such a good advocate of why those bans are really horrible.
There it is. There they are. So in case you don't understand why I am angry, it is because conversion therapy is the fake-ass, medieval torture science that LGBTQA people are still sometimes subjected to, where medical professionals, real medical professionals, try and force children and teens to not be gay or trans. Most people with a functioning brain or any basic empathy would know that's unethical. Regardless of how they feel about gay and trans people, that's unethical. And they're talking about banning conversion therapy being damaging for kids as if it's not torture. These are people who wrote this bill. This is the real threat of letting any of these bills pass because of the dangerous backsliding it will cause for the LGBTQA. Everyone, all of us will be affected by this. And I can't go any further. This video took a lot out of me. There were so many points that I wanted to drop at, so many points that I was like, it doesn't matter. And then I'll see where another state has one of these bills. It's not just Alabama anymore. It is becoming everywhere. It is all of us. It is everywhere. In the US, at least. So it's definitely getting past to the point where we can overturn it state by state. We have to make federal moves. We have to get federal attention for this backsliding behavior. I've contacted organizations. I've contacted local organizations. I've heard nothing back. It feels like everything I do and everyone I contact is wishful thinking. And I'm just tired. Funnily enough, some of the only good news or irony of any of this is the only reason these bills didn't pass last year is because of COVID. My source on that is that the bitches say it themselves.
So where is your legislation now?
Well, it had passed. We were halfway there. It had actually made it through our Senate and was getting ready to come through the House, but the coronavirus came along. And so our legislative session has completely shut down. We will not be, which basically we're going to come back just to work on the budget. But other than that, all of the bills that were not passed this year are dead. And we will have to come back next year and start all over again. So we've had a good start. And this gives us more time to get ready for next year. But it also gives the opposition more time to fight back against us. So we're going to keep working. And I am hopeful, especially with health being so much on the forefront, I'm hoping that we will be able to show how this is a danger to health and be able to get it passed next year.
All right, y'all. So that's what we're up against. We got about a year. Thank you if you have managed to make it to the end of this video. You deserve to take a rest, and I hope you have a wonderful day.